Yes, I think that the deficits and the mounting debt that they produce is a challenge. I would disconnect it from the other challenge that you mentioned, which is that we will not be able to pay 100 cents of the obligated dollar to working Americans who paid into Social Security every day of their lives as soon as the 2030s or maybe even earlier. To meet that challenge, we simply need to raise the cap on income that is taxed into the Social Security Trust Fund. It stops at $132,000 right now. Every dime, every $1 million more that you make from that, it is not taxed for those purposes. If we raise that cap, we ensure the viability of that program well into the next century, and I want to make sure that we do that. But ironically, the $2 trillion tax cut that added to that deficit spending and the $22+ trillion in national debt that we have right now that flowed to the wealthiest and to corporations was used as an excuse for quote-unquote entitlement reform. We added all this debt, now we got to cut benefits to working Americans. We absolutely cannot buy in to the premise of that challenge. We have to acknowledge how we got these debts in the first place. Unpaid for tax cuts in the George W. Bush administration, unpaid for tax cuts in the Donald Trump administration. $6 trillion of that debt for unpaid wars that we've been fighting since 9/11 or since 1991, if you want to be honest about how long we've been in Iraq. In those wars, don't start any new ones, including in Iran, which this president is threatening to do right now. An amazing dividend we will enjoy. And then the last thing, roll back the worst of the Trump tax cuts. They took a corporate rate from 35 to 21%. Even if you only took it back up to 28%, you would generate hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years. If you tax capital at the same rate that you tax ordinary income, hundreds of billions of dollars over the next 10 years. And then if you invest in people, higher education, pre-K, healthcare, this economy is really going to start to hum, and we will be able to invest in all of these challenges or opportunities that we've been describing here today. So I know we can do it. I know that we can do it without having to sacrifice Social Security or Medicare in the process. Thanks for asking.
Could you speak a little more toward your foreign policy approach, particularly in regard to Iran and China?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, somebody put it to me this way, just talking about the trade war that we're in with China right now. When has the United States ever gone to war without allies? Which is precisely what we're doing when it comes to China. Imposing these tariffs that have provoked reciprocal tariffs that the farmers in Iowa and really all across this country are bearing the brunt of right now. Not only are they not able to reach those markets they built a lifetime to develop, but those markets might very well be closed to them going forward, even after the end of this trade war. So instead of turning our backs on our trading partners, Canada, Mexico, the European Union, enlist them in the fight against China, because I think that's actually the right fight to take on. China's manipulated the rules of the road. They've dumped below cost onto this market. They've manipulated their currency as well. If there's not accountability, they will continue to do it. But let's approach China with a united front. Right now, we're doing this alone, and there's no exit ramp for those farmers and for the American consumer who's being taxed in the process for this failed policy. When it comes to Iran, I'd say much the same. President Obama struck one of the best foreign policy deals in the modern history of this country. Imperfect as any deal is, but without firing a shot or invading yet another Middle Eastern country, he was able to stop Iran's progress towards the development of a nuclear weapon and negotiate that with the permanent members of the UN Security Council, Germany, and the country of Iran. And inexplicably, this president has left that agreement, making it less likely that we can prevent Iran from developing that nuclear weapon and giving us no path forward to address other legitimate concerns, their development of ballistic missile technology, their funding of Houthis or Hezbollah, the land bridge they built from the Gulf to the Mediterranean through Iraq and Syria. We're doing this alone, and our European partners are reticent to come back to the negotiating table with us. It's only in concert and in working with allies and friends and partners that we can meet those two challenges or climate change or nuclear nonproliferation or addressing the migration crisis in the Western Hemisphere. And so I as president, will work with our friends and partners and allies to resolve these challenges. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm asking this for my son, who asked me to ask you about compulsory voting, like what they have in Australia, and what's your opinion about that? Thank you.
The short answer, to give you a direct answer, is no. I don't agree with forcing people to vote, but in the spirit of the question, I want to make sure that it is as easy as it has ever been to cast a ballot. Our proposal calls for the following. One, automatic and same-day voter registration, which would add upwards of 50 million additional Americans to the rolls. If they turn out at a rate about 10% higher than we have traditionally, we'll have 35 million more ballots cast in the 2024 presidential election. We can implement this under our first term. A new Voting Rights Act. So we saw in Georgia the purging of voter rolls that removed hundreds of thousands of Americans. There's a reason we had the Voting Rights Act. In 1965, it was to prevent secretaries of state who were running for Senate themselves from taking voters out of the equation. If we had that Voting Rights Act in place, Stacey Abrams would be the governor of that state right now. End the practice of gerrymandering, where members of Congress choose their voters instead of the other way around. Have paper receipts for every ballot cast so you can audit every election in the United States of America, and invest in election security, especially after the Trump administration, who called Vladimir Putin after the Mueller report was released and described it as a hoax, thereby inviting him to participate in our elections, invade our democracy again. I think if we take all those steps, in addition to making Election Day a national holiday, we'll get more people to the polls, and I think we'll meet the challenge that your son,
Australia had a lot of people voting this last time.
Yeah, I think those steps will get record participation. Yeah.
And we're upstairs, and this is going to be our last question, and then we're going to go outside on the porch and say hi and take a picture if you'd like.
And swim.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name's Alyssa. I actually live right here in Meredith, and one of the things you touched on when you first walked in, you mentioned how the state of New Hampshire, we take politics pretty seriously. We have a very unique state government. I feel like we're generally pretty involved. And one of the things that I just wanted to kind of get a feel for from you and the many other candidates who are going to be coming through our state is, everybody gets really hyped up about a presidential election, but, it all trickles down. And our state government, our governor, our local governments, the attitude at the top really affects what happens in those, much smaller picture politics.
Yeah.
You talked about climate change. Our local community right here in Meredith and many other across the state aren't even recycling anymore. It's crazy. And I guess my question for you is, I'd like to hear, what type of leader will you be, and what kind of tone would you set from day one?
Yeah. Every single month that I was in Congress for 6 years, I held an all-comers welcomed, no-holds-bar town hall. Means if you love me, you came out to those, and my mom often did. And if you were upset with me about a vote I had taken and wanted to make sure I knew you were upset, you came out to those meetings. If you had a question or an idea on an issue that was important to you, you came to those meetings, and we listened to everyone, literally until the last person had asked the last question. Hundreds of people would come out to these. I went into those meetings with a healthy dose of fear. I was going to face those who put me into this position of public trust, and I was going to be accountable to them. And that sentiment was with me at every step in my service. So every vote I cast, I thought, how am I going to explain this month when I meet my constituents again in El Paso? That direct level of accountability made me a much better public servant than I otherwise would have been. When someone at one of these meetings told me that veterans who came back with an other than honorable discharge could not go to the VA and get care, and amidst a suicide crisis for veterans, their rate of death was twice as high. We not only introduced the bill, but we found the Republican colleagues with whom we could get it passed and got it signed into law by the one man with whom I agree on almost nothing, Donald Trump, but found enough common ground to get that done. So that level of democracy and accountability and representation and service, and always reminding myself of who it is I serve at the end of the day. That's how I'm going to serve as president. Accountable not to PACs or corporations or special interests or lobbyists, none of whom are allowed to contribute to this campaign, but accountable to you and others who are standing up to be counted right now at this moment of truth. And we will always pursue what we think is in the national interest without regard to polling or prospects in the next election. It's the way that I've always served. It's the way that I've always campaigned. That race that we ran in Texas, we took not a single poll, listened to not a single focus group, just listened to the people that we wanted to serve and represent, and reflected that back across the state. So that's what I'm doing on the campaign trail right now. That's the way that I would love to serve you as President of the United States. Thanks so much.
If you want to head out there, and we're going to send people along out there. Let's not get too many people on the deck at once.
Thanks for asking the question. I'll grab it real quick, and we'll get that squared away.
Oh, really?
Come on out.
There you go. Best background ever.
Wolfboro, New Hampshire. We got to do it.
Will you add this? We gotta go there. All right. We can take a picture. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for being here.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Feels good. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you very much. Hi. How are you?
I just want to get your info so we can get the picture to you and everything. And you want Beto to come to Wolfboro.
Oh, he used my camera.
Edie Damaris is the state representative who lives in Wolfboro. There's plenty of room.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Nice to meet you. And what's your
Thanks for
name?
coming out. Really appreciate it. Yeah. You all live here in Meredith?
Well, P-A-U-L. And you just took a picture. Anything that is of note?
I think she had invited Beto that we should go.
Oh, no. That was Bruce. Yes. Anything of note?
No pressure.
Are you interested in that?
Future of the country.
Yes.
Well, let's take a picture.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, help us spread the word. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks. Yeah.
Where do you live?
Hey. Thank you for coming out to this. Appreciate it. Isn't this beautiful? Yeah. The whole day's been like this. It's just, yeah, one of the most beautiful days. You know what? I really want to do that. If Cynthia's going to let me, I'm going to.
Do it. We are totally gonna do it.
Wow, we love to see that. Thank you for taking this
Picture. Very nice.
Right on. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and thanks for talking about student debt in New Hampshire.
Of course.
Horrible problem.
I hear about it
teach at
everywhere
Plymouth
we
State
go.
University.